Welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications talk show produced by students. I'm Madeline Markman, a junior studying digital film and TV production, and our guest today is Diane McFarlane, who was an executive editor at the Gainesville Sun and Sarasota Herald Tribune before becoming the president and publisher of the Sarasota Herald Tribune. She is also the former dean of the UFCJC. Now she's Dean Emeritus of the college. Hi, Diane. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Madeline. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so cool that you are a graduate of the CJC. Did you always want to study journalism?
You know, for as long as I can remember, I wanted to study journalism. My goal in life was to be the top editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Don't ask me why I homed in on that particular paper. And although I never achieved that goal, I had a career in journalism that I thoroughly enjoyed. And it was kind of punctuated for me when I was 15 years old, because my father knew of my interest in newspapers, and he mentioned it to the publisher of the local newspaper in my hometown, which is Lake Wales, Florida. And he knew the publisher through their Rotary Club, and he mentioned it. And Mr. Marsh, John Marsh, said, well, send her down to talk to me. Long story short, he ended up hiring me, and by the end of the summer, I was the vacation replacement for the county commission reporter, and I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life, and I also knew that this is where I wanted to get my degree, because this program had such a sterling reputation, so it all played out for me.
Wow. That's incredible to have started as a teenager in newspapers.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience, and particularly, it was Lake Wales, Florida. It's a really small town in Central Florida, very small paper. I think the circulation was 10,000. But because it was so small, I got to do things that I would have never been able to do had it been the Orlando Sentinel or the Boca Raton News. It was just a golden opportunity, and both Mr. Marsh, the owner and publisher, and John Caldwell, the managing editor, took a special interest in me because I was a young woman who, was driven to get into the business. So they gave me opportunities that were just golden. And summer after my senior year in high school, both of them had to be out of town at the same time, and they left me in charge of the newsroom. So I was getting experiences that were so rare.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And tell us about your time as a reporter and eventually managing editor of the Sarasota Herald Tribune.
Well, because of this experience in high school, now I worked every summer, Christmas, spring vacation, every break at the Daily Highlander through high school and college. So by the time I graduated, I had a good bit of experience and a thick portfolio of articles. I was engaged to marry my high school sweetheart. He was in Sarasota, so that's where I interviewed first, and lo and behold, they had a reporter position. So I was hired as a reporter in the August after I graduated in June, and then just took on different roles. I was assistant news editor, and then at 26, I was city editor. At 30, I became managing editor, which was very young, but I had so much more experience than the typical 30-year-old. And that was when the New York Times bought our newspaper, and we became part of that company. And that's why I didn't want to leave, because that was such a great company to work for. So I stayed in Sarasota until the New York Times asked me to go to the Gainesville Sun as executive editor. So I came here at 33 as executive editor.
Wow, that's incredible. Quite fast-paced in a career.
It really was. But again, I've counseled students over the years about this. You can be a little fish in a big pond or a big fish in a little pond, and either path works. either path can advance you. It's just a different pace. So my pace, kind of being a big fish in a little pond, if you will, because I had, this experience, positioned me to rise through the ranks in that little pond. I could have, gone to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is, where I'd always envisioned being, but my progression would have been much slower, and neither path is wrong. They're both great paths, but you have to consider a lot of other factors, where you want to live, your personal circumstances. Again, I was a newlywed and my husband was working in Sarasota, so all those things factor in.
What a big time in life to have the personal life and the career life just blossoming at once.
Yeah, it was. Of course, back then it was sort of assumed that you would get engaged in college and get married right after college. And I'm happy that that's not the presumption these days, that all of us can pursue whatever we want to pursue without societal pressures like that. But it did put me on that path, and I think probably the best thing to happen to me in my career, other than that experience in high school, was when the New York Times bought that newspaper, because they brought a big city ethic to our newsroom. They invested a great deal of money in the newspaper, and so we were punching above our weight.
That's quite a challenge. And eventually you became the executive editor at the Gainesville Sun. So what led to this move, and what did this role entail?
Well, I'm assuming that the New York Times Company wanted me to have experience as the top editor. When you're managing editor and city editor, you're very focused on the day-to-day news coverage. But as executive editor, you have larger considerations. You have the strategic direction of the newsroom. You're the final voice in hiring people and selecting candidates. You determine how resources are going to be invested and what investigative stories you're going to make that big investment in. So Gainesville was an opportunity to do that, and I loved it. I was only here 3 years, sadly, but it was a wonderful 3 years. First of all, how exciting it was to come back to Gainesville, where the University of Florida is, where the J School is, and to be able to interact with professors that I admired so much, but to be more of a peer with them now as editor of the Sun. And Gainesville was in a period of dramatic transition then. It was going from a town that was very small and not a lot of rapid growth to one that was growing rapidly, and there was a great deal of friction in the community over that. The environmental community, the community that was concerned about growth, was in contention, if you will, with the business community that wanted to see that growth. And so we had a role to play as the local newspaper to kind of mediate those debates and cover those debates in a way that both sides would see as fair. So it was really an exciting time. It was also a newsroom. The newsroom in Gainesville was less than half the size of the newsroom in Sarasota. So I was able to be out on the floor more and, really engaging more directly with the reporters and editors, and I loved that.
Wow. To be around during that time of friction and at this role in the newspaper. So were there any particular stories that stand out as impactful to the North Central Florida community at that time?
There were a lot of really interesting stories going on there, and we had such a fabulous group of reporters. They were digging up a lot of stories. One of the things that newspapers did beautifully then and really aren't capable of doing now was we were present day to day at city commission meetings, county commission meetings. We were in City Hall. We were at the county administration building, in the courtrooms, at the police department, really observing what was going on and determining what things residents needed to know. And that's so important because citizens don't know what they don't know. And if the newspaper is not present, the residents of any community are busy. They're raising families. They have their own jobs to do. So it was the role of the newspaper to ferret all that out, and I feel like we did a good job of that. We started winning awards, and the New York Times took notice and they invested in the Gainesville Sun. We made a proposal for a strategic expansion of the newsroom, and they invested in that, giving us money for, I think it was 20 new positions, which really made a big difference, and the community noticed that.
Oh, wow. What kind of difference?
Well, you're covering things that you weren't able to cover before. It's really about capacity, and it's about attention span. And if you have a very small staff of people, it's difficult, to justify sitting through a whole county commission meeting. But when you do that, you become aware of things that are going on in the community that you might not have known about otherwise. So I'm very hopeful that journalism will get back to that the capacity will be regained. It will be different. It will look different than it has in the past, but I'm hopeful that a new formula will be figured out. For one thing, the printing process is so expensive, and so with the reduction of the frequency of the print product, that I think will make it possible for organizations through digital means to be able to report with less expense than we had in the past.
A revival.
Right, yeah, hopeful.
Hopeful for it, to get back to that investigation.
That's right. And that presence. My old paper in Sarasota, the Herald Tribune, is doing a fantastic job of investigative journalism. They've won Pulitzers, they've won a lot of national awards for their work. But what is being lost there and in other communities is that day-to-day presence, is making the community aware of what's going on. And as I said, people don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they're missing. And there's a great deal of research being done now by institutions of higher learning into the impact of this. And what they're finding is that, in fact, voting is down, corruption is up. If you don't have anyone minding the store, if you will, if you don't have that watchdog role, then there's a greater tendency for corrupt behavior to start to emerge. And that is beginning to be detected in communities around the country. So that's why the journalist role is so critically important. That is the obligation of journalists, is to be present and to inform the public about what's going on in their own communities. Everybody's focused on what's going on nationally. We can all tell you what's going on in national politics, right? But the knowledge and awareness of what's going on at the grassroots level has been diminished.
And after some time, you elevate to the role of president and publisher of the Sarasota Herald Tribune. Now, was this a promotion that you were already working for, or did you have to compete for this position?
I never wanted to be a publisher. My goal was to stay in the newsroom. I envisioned, playing out the rest of my career as executive editor. But I had been executive editor by that time for 9 years, I think, and I was beginning to think, what's next? I don't think I want to stay in this role for another 20 years. So my boss and mentor, Lynn Matthews, who was president of the Herald Tribune, was named president of the New York Times Regional Newspaper Group, which meant he would be over all of the New York Times regional newspapers. And at that time, I think there were about 20 of them. So he called me into his office, and he said, I would like for you to succeed me. I think you're ready to be a publisher. And I turned him down. I said, I really don't think I would be happy in the publisher role. I love the news business so much. The business side doesn't appeal to me. So thank you very much. I appreciate your confidence, but I don't think I want to do it. And I was also on the ladder to be president of the American Society of Newspaper Editors, which is a role that I'd aspired to for several years and worked very hard for that organization. And I didn't think that a publisher could be head of AS&E. Long story short, he kept at me about it. And finally he said, look, it can be you or it can be someone you don't know who may not be a great boss. So you decide. And after a lot of soul searching, I thought, well, okay, I'll give this a shot. It's time to try something different. I'm probably in a rut here. I love to be on the learning curve, and boy, is this a way to get on the learning curve. So I accepted it, and it's one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. I loved everything about it. I learned so much. I learned how to be a businesswoman in addition to being a newswoman. I learned how to read spreadsheets and P&L statements and how to manage that side of the business. I learned how presses run, and I got to engage with the different cultures in the newsroom. We had 8 locations over 4 counties, 600 employees. Our revenue base was $125 million. It was a big operation, so it was a lot for me to bite off. But it was just a blast. And then, as I mentioned earlier, probably one of the biggest advantages was that I got to engage in the community as a volunteer, as a frontline community volunteer, without worrying about that conflict issue, because the newsroom knew that I would never tell them to write something that was going to look favorably on something that I was involved with. So that was a whole new vista for me, and I just loved it. So I had that role. I was in the publisher role for 12 years. When the next thing happened in my life.
The next thing, which would be?
Well, the New York Times sold the regional newspaper group. And it was a great business decision for the Times because local journalism was in decline. And that's a long story, and I think most people know that story. But our paper was sold, and so new owners came in, and it was they were nice people, but it was a very different organization from the New York Times. And they cut benefits of the employees, and I was going to bat to try to keep those benefits, and I was becoming a thorn in the side of the new owners. So I thought, it probably is time for me to move on, but what am I going to do? What is next for me? And I was thinking about the nonprofit sector. I was actually thinking about a foundation because Season of Sharing had been so rewarding. And I was at a time in my life when the money wasn't important anymore. I wanted to continue to do something in the public service space. So about that time, John Wright of this college retired, announced that he was stepping down. He didn't retire, he announced that he was stepping down as dean. And I got a call from the recruiter, the search firm for the position, and said, "You've been nominated to throw your hat in the ring for dean." And I said, well, I laughed. I said, well, I appreciate the call and I'm so flattered, but I can't be dean. I don't have an advanced degree. I've been on the Dean's Search Committee. I'd been on the Dean's Search Committee 2 positions before John, and I said, I know that an advanced degree is required, but thanks for calling. And she said, not so fast. The president and publisher want us to bring to the table, the way she phrased it was CEO types with a journalism background. And I said, really? Okay, I have to think about this. So I did, and I consulted a lot of trusted advisors, and to the person they said, you have to do this, Diane, you'd be crazy to pass up this opportunity. Long story short, I did, and I was selected, and it was probably the most wonderful thing to happen to me, was to be able to come up here at a time of great expansion and momentum in this college. It's an amazing place. It's a very special place, and it's always been an ambitious institution, and to contribute to that growth and momentum was immensely rewarding, and to be around students. Here, it was all optimism and forward thinking and excitement and just this sense of energy that was so invigorating. And timing in life is everything, and I have benefited in my life from just incredible good timing in terms of opportunities that have been presented to me. I arrived, the recession ends, the university starts reinvesting in the college, And so we had the means to do some things that the college had not been able to do over a period of time, including expanding faculty, adding new programs, adding 3 centers, opening the agency, expanding the Innovation News Center, expanding the media properties. It was just a glorious time, and I feel so blessed that I was here.
Oh, wow. What a beautiful trajectory.
Yeah, it was.
Wow. So now on the topic of your time as Dean of the CJC, what were some of your personal highlights in this role?
I'm very proud of the fact that we nurtured research, was able to be able to help build those programs. We expanded our stable of researchers. Esteemed faculty were hired during that period because, again, we had the resources to do that, and they've made such a huge difference.
And now you're Dean Emeritus. So what do you do in this role?
I just have that fancy title. I'm fully retired. I'm working on my health, and I got married in November, and my husband and I are traveling, just trying to do things that neither one of us had time to do when we were full-time career people. We both worked long hours and 7 days a week, and so we're trying to build another side of our lives. But at the same time, I am always here for this college, and I really use Dean Ralph Lowenstein as my role model. Ralph was continued to live in Gainesville as I am. I have a home here, and he was always available to me for advice or counsel, just a second opinion, whatever, but he never meddled. He never inserted himself inappropriately into our business. And so that's how I want to be as Dean Emeritus, always here, always willing to help if I'm able. But, my term is up, my tenure is up, and it's one that I feel good about, and I hope others do as well. But I'm so excited about Hub Brown's tenure. I've known him for many years. We've served on accreditation site teams together, and I know what a high caliber dean he's going to be. He is. His integrity, his excitement about this college and its potential.
Oh, and the way that you still have this this warmth to the Gator community, it's just so wonderful. as a lifelong Gator Nation.
Yeah, I grew up a Gator. My dad was a Gator. As I said, I never aspired to go anywhere but here. This was where I wanted to get my degree. And then I was on the Journalism Advisory Council for 15 years for this college. I was on the Dean Search Committee when I was editor of the Gainesville Sun. And so my life has been, I joke, my life has been up and down I-75. Because when I left here, I went to Sarasota, and then I came back here as editor of the Sun, and then I went back to Sarasota, and then I came here as dean, and now this is home. I always thought I would retire to Sarasota, but I love Gainesville, and I love being in this environment, being a part of a university city, and being able to watch, to be on the front line, if you will, of what's happening in this college. I could not be prouder of this college, and it's just going to continue to soar because its capacity has been built so solidly that the sky's the limit.
Wow. Now, here's the next part. What advice would you give to graduating students who are looking to get their foot in the door?
Well, my primary piece of advice is to do exactly what you're doing and what this class is doing, and that is do it. Whatever it is you think you want to do as a career, do it. Try it on for size, practice it, and one of two things are going to happen. One is you'll find that you're really, really good at it, that you really love it, and when you go to job interviews, they're going to be very impressed that you've already done it, that you have a portfolio that is evidence of your capacity to do well in that job. The other thing that might happen is you'll find that you don't like it at all. and it's really not the right career for you, and that you should try some other things to see what would really give you joy. Because joy in work is critically important. If you don't find joy in it, you're not going to be good at it, and your life will be fairly miserable. So yes, do this, practice, practice, practice. Try things that you think you might not like. I always said, be a regular volunteer. One quick anecdote, when I was city editor in Sarasota, the owners of the paper, this was before the New York Times Company, were investing in the first online computer system for the newspaper, and they needed someone to be the online editor to help program that computer and get it up and running for the newsroom. I knew nothing about computers. I've never been a math genius or a science genius, but I knew that I was going to learn something, so I raised my hand and volunteered. They sent me to Boston for 6 weeks in January and February to learn how to program this system. And it opened up a whole other side of my brain I didn't know I had. That has kind of shut down now because I don't know much about computers again. But it was such a remarkable experience for me. And shortly after that, I took flying lessons to learn how to fly planes because I was kind of afraid of flying and I didn't understand flying. And I just think that's critically important. Whatever you're most fearful of, do it. Take a chance on yourself, and you'll be so surprised at what you're capable of doing, and even more surprised at how it opens doors for you and how perceptions of you will shift. When I learned the computer system, the publisher had to come to me to see if something could be done. So all of a sudden, I had power and influence in that organization that I would have never had prior to that. So always volunteer, even if you're terrified.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for your insight. And this is so inspiring to hear stories from a newswoman to businesswoman with philanthropic efforts, and as well as dabblings in plane flying and computer programming. It has been incredible to hear your story, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Madeline. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers for joining us. Until next time, good night. Thank you.